Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Small Caps. My name is Jess Holland, and I am your host for this next interview with Surefire Resources. Surefire is an ASX-listed Perth junior explorer, and the company's ticker code is SRN. I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Paul Burton, Surefire's Managing Director. Hi, Paul. How are you?
Great, Jess. Good to see you.
Firstly, Paul, congratulations on executing the memorandum of understanding with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Investment. Could you provide our audience, with a bit more detail about the key aspects of this MOU and how it aligns with the overall strategy of Surefire Resources?
Yes, thanks, Jess. It's a significant step for us to achieve this agreement with them. It's something we've been discussing for the last few months and negotiating with them on. The ministry allows us to develop the concept of putting a process plant in Saudi Arabia on a joint venture basis with a Saudi Arabian company, which allows us to then access various incentives and things that the Saudi government has in place at the moment. They're moving away from this dependence on oil and gas. And as a result, they're focusing heavily on bringing in investors and their own developed policies of processing of mineral commodities in particular that can be used in country. Saudi, from our perspective, has some great incentives from us. If we can provide a feedstock for mineral commodities that they require, then there's a win-win situation, and that's how we've approached it with them. Currently, they are a very large steel producer and a lot of steel fabrication units there as well. There's 41 steel mills there, but they don't have a vanadium operation in place, so they import their vanadium pentoxide for the steel industry. So our proposal was to have a vanadium processing plant there to produce all sorts of vanadium products, for which we have a very high-grade resource in Australia that we can supply feed to. This was an approach that they were interested in and welcomed, and hence today's agreement is the first step in us then moving towards some binding agreements to put that in place.
Okay, fantastic, Paul. So I guess you've touched on this already slightly, but, what are the key factors that you think that attracted the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in this collaboration in particular?
Well, we have a very large vanadium resource and we're proximal to a port, so it's a very doable operation for us to produce a magnetite concentrate that's high grade and then ship. I mean, shipping is relatively cheap these days across the oceans. It's very competitive. So we've looked at all the figures and it works extremely well. And in fact, there are other companies doing the very same thing on other commodities and not even in the resources sector, shipping things offshore. So it's that whole concept that they like. But in particular, they welcome the opportunity to have processing facilities in their country because it creates employment, it creates IP, creates know-how, and also allows them to produce products that they need in country for their own growth plans, plus also gives them the opportunity for export. So, the detail of how that's all going to work is our next stage, but it's extremely interesting.
Amazing. Thanks, Paul. And so do you think that this agreement in particular provides Surefire with a, development pathway of a low capital cost operation in Australia? And just to tie that in, how does that strategic approach sort of contribute to the overall success of the Victory Bore project?
Yes, well, on the first point, it does indeed, because if we just step back 1 second to look at the alternative. The alternative is to build a plant and produce the vanadium pentoxide in country here. And as we know, there's been huge cost escalations, not only from equipment pricing, but also wages, in particular power costs. So it's a very, very expensive consideration to have a downstream processing plant that's a very, very technical plant as well. Plus, there are other challenges now as well. We have with environmental and heritage and everything else. So challenges for building a big project with a downstream processing plant are enormous, and we shouldn't kid ourselves that they're not. So our plan was then, okay, let's look at an offshore jurisdiction where it has much lower costs, and they actually have incentives for you to go there. And there's a number of those around, and we chose Saudi to explore and see how far we could go with them. But on that concept, then all we're producing at the mine site is a magnetite concentrate. I say all, but because it's a mine, and then we go through a beneficiation, which is a crush grind, and then magnetic separation. It's a relatively simple process and very, very tried and tested, and we know the costs. So it's going to be circa 200 million US or less to have all that up and running. So that means a lower cost operation from our perspective. You compared to, it's going to be in excess of $1 billion probably to have a full processing plant to produce vanadium pentoxide on the site, and then all the various emission controls and things that's going to need to be required post that. Plus, we don't have the market for the B205. The other important thing with the Saudi is that they are a ready market for the products that we would be producing. So ferrovanadium, vanadium pentoxide, vanadium electrolyte, all of these things that are useful for not only their growth plans, because they're building these mega cities over there for the future, plus their electrification is in progress, and their transition from traditional powers to alternative power, for which the vanadium redox batteries is certainly on their agenda. So it's an extremely good development pathway. It's a real development pathway. We can actually see how this comes into fruition. We've already spoke to engineering groups that work in that vicinity. They have offices in Riyadh, and it allows us to potentially get a development team in place very, very quickly.
Amazing. Thanks, Paul. Now, just for the purposes of our audience's understanding, can you give us an idea of, what is vanadium used for? What are the key applications of vanadium and these minerals that you're, looking to develop in the future?
Yeah, so vanadium pentoxide, we should say, is the product. That comes out as a flake, and it's used globally in the steel industry, around about 90% of it in the steel industry for alloying. Plus, the more vanadium that goes into steel, the greener the steel becomes, if you like, as there's less other impurities and less iron required. So there's that. But as buildings get taller and larger, and the requirements are for higher grade reinforced bars, then more vanadium is needed in the steel. So that's the predominant use for vanadium. But vanadium as an element has a unique property for retaining electric charge. And hence the vanadium electrolyte, if you can recover that, is used for these vanadium redox flow batteries, which the concept has been around for many, many years. In fact, it was developed here in Australia. But it hasn't really caught on as a power or energy storage unit. It is now gaining a lot of traction. There's more vanadium redox batteries being produced in China than ever before. They recognise they are the missing link between your solar power and your wind power to store the energy before it goes onto the grid or goes into however it's used. So they definitely are becoming an alternative choice. And vanadium is, as I say, 90% used in the steel industry. There won't be enough vanadium currently mined at the moment, once the vanadium redox batteries do take off, if and when, to supply the vanadium electrolyte. So there's a huge future for it, and that's why it's called a critical mineral. And as such, is getting a lot of attention because most of the vanadium was produced within China, and now they're using it within China. And the rest of the world, as it transitions away from oil and gas power, we'll be looking at these as one of the alternative methods. So it has a great future.
That's so interesting. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for sharing that. So now shifting gears a little bit, can you provide us an update on the progress of the pre-feasibility study for the Victory Bore project, and also elaborate on the specific work programs that you guys are currently working with your engineering teams who have been appointed to complete the PFS for you?
Yeah, sure. The PFS is being pulled together by our metallurgical group, METS, who have done most of the work on all vanadium deposits in Australia, I would say. So they have a very good handle on what's required. It's proceeding extremely well. We're expecting it to be completed in November this year. I met with them yesterday. We're ahead of schedule at the moment. These things do change, of course, over time, but I'm very confident that we'll be keeping to our time schedule on this. We also have other reputable engineering groups involved for geotech and for the mine planning, mine design. So yes, it's going to be a well credentialed PFS, and additionally, we will have a lot of information from our proposed plant areas in Saudi by then to feed into the PFS. So the concept is good, and it fits with the pre-fees schedule that we have at the moment. So yes, it's all going very well.
That's brilliant, Paul. So now you've mentioned a timeline schedule. I have one last question for you, Paul, and that is just to summarize, what we've just chatted about. Can you share 3 key takeaways for our small caps audience as to why Surefire Resources is an attractive investment opportunity?
Indeed. Surefire as a company has got 3 significant projects. We've got this one as our flagship, the vanadium Victory Bore. We've got a very large magnetite project, which incidentally is potentially of interest to the Saudis as well. They're looking for what they call green steel. This is a very large magnetite deposit that has very high grades, and plus we have a gold project, our Yibbi gold project. So if you look at our share price, none of these are reflected in the share price at all at the moment, which gives a very good opportunity for investors.
Fantastic, Paul. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you coming on and having a discussion with us, and really look forward to watching the company's latest developments and getting you back on.
Thanks very much, Jess, and you're most welcome.